After an emergency return home, a woman finds her comatose daughter has been betrayed by husband, who has stolen all of her money. With the help of a trusted friend, she freezes her daughter's accounts, sues her husband, and wins the case. But is she ready to let go of her daughter to save another life? Before we continue, have you subscribed yet? Hit that button for more amazing stories and tell us in the comment where you're watching from. I remember the call as if it were yesterday, though an eternity of anguish has since passed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, its screen glowing with the too familiar name of my son-in-law, Mark. I was in a different time zone, half a world away, and the hour was ungodly, a premonition of the terror to come. "It's Elena," he said, his voice a panicked whisper that was utterly unlike his usual confident drawl. "There's been an accident." My heart, a loyal, steady drum my entire life, missed a beat. He told me she had collapsed, an aneurysm, the doctors said. She was in a coma. The flight home was a blur of fear and frantic prayer. I didn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The world outside the airplane window, with its neat quilt of clouds and endless blue, felt like a cruel joke. I was racing toward a nightmare, one I had never imagined possible for my beautiful, vibrant daughter. Elena was my only child, my whole world. She was the sunlight that had filled my life since the day she was born. A woman of grace, intellect, and a laugh that could make you forget every worry. And Mark was the man she had chosen to share her life with, the man who had promised to protect her. When I landed, Mark was there, a gaunt, ghostly version of himself. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. He embraced me, a desperate, shuddering hug, and I felt a brief pang of sympathy for him. We rode in silence to the hospital, the city's familiar landmarks passing by like scenes from a forgotten film. I was a stranger in my own life. The hospital room was sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of my daughter's skin. Elena lay in the bed, still and silent, a network of tubes and wires the only sign of her struggle for life. Her face was peaceful, as if she were merely asleep, but the machines beside her, with their rhythmic beeping and whirring, told a different story. I took her hand, warm beneath my touch, and whispered her name. She didn't stir. The first few days were a vigil. I sat by her side, holding her hand, reading to her, talking to her. Mark came and went, offering coffee and platitudes, but his presence felt off. He was distant, his grief seeming performative, like a costume he couldn't quite get right. I chalked it up to shock, to the overwhelming stress of the situation, but a gnawing unease began to settle in my gut. It was when I asked to see her financial statements that the unease turned to ice. "Just to make sure everything's in order," I'd said, a casual request. He hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "Of course, Mom," he'd said, using the affectionate term he'd adopted years ago, but his eyes were darting, restless. He brought me a single folder, a selection of carefully curated bills, and a printout showing a healthy-looking savings account. It was too neat, too perfect. My daughter was a careful, meticulous woman. She didn't have one folder for her finances. She had a dedicated fireproof cabinet. I knew her better than anyone. I called my friend Sarah, a forensic accountant with the sharpest mind I'd ever known and a heart of gold. She had been my rock since college. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling, "I need your help. I think something is very wrong." The next week was a blur of digital forensics and whispered phone calls. Sarah, working from her home office, started digging. The first thing she found was a hidden, empty savings account under Elena's name. Then a second, and a third. The trail led to a shell corporation Mark had set up just a few months before the accident. The money wasn't just gone. It had been systematically siphoned away, not just from Elena's personal accounts, but from the joint accounts, the investments, even the small trust fund her grandmother had left her. Every cent. The staggering amount was enough to make my vision swim. It wasn't just theft, it was a total erasure. He hadn't just stolen her money, he'd stolen her future. He had planned to leave her with nothing. He had banked on her never waking up. The sympathy I had felt for him evaporated. replaced by a cold, righteous fury that burned hotter than any fire I had ever known. "This is grand larceny," Sarah said, her voice grim. "It's cold, calculated, and deeply illegal. I have enough here to freeze every one of his assets and get a temporary restraining order on the funds." "Do it," I said, the words a raw whisper. That same afternoon, I confronted Mark in the hospital waiting room. His face was pale when I walked in, but he tried to put on his mask of a worried husband. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked. "Don't call me that," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Where is the money, Mark?" He blinked, confusion turning to a flash of panic. "What money?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "All of it. Every last penny of my daughter's money. Where is it?" He tried to bluster, to feign outrage, but the charade was over, his face contorted, a mask of worry replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. "She wouldn't have needed it, would she?" he spat. "It's mine now. All of it." The words were a physical blow. The cruelty was breathtaking. He thought he had won. He thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn a very hard lesson. Sarah filed the lawsuit the next day. The news hit Mark like a tidal wave. He tried to fight back, of course, hiring a high-priced lawyer who tried to paint me as a grieving, irrational mother, trying to get her hands on her daughter's rightful inheritance. But he underestimated me. He underestimated my grief, and he certainly underestimated Sarah. She had every single transaction, every forged signature, every lie documented. The evidence was irrefutable. The court proceedings were a theater of the absurd. Mark, with his clean-cut face and his practiced air of sincerity, tried to spin a tale of a devoted husband managing his wife's assets for her benefit. He spoke of his love for Elena in a way that made me want to scream. But Sarah calmly and methodically presented her evidence. Bank statements showing transfers to his personal accounts, wire transfers to offshore accounts, and the forged documents with Elena's signature. My daughter, the woman who was so meticulous, never, ever signed with a flourish like that. Sarah had cross-referenced the forged signatures with real ones from old passports and contracts, proving they were fraudulent. The judge, a stoic woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, listened without a single flicker of emotion. The day the verdict came down was the first time I felt hope since the call. The judge ruled decisively in our favor, ordering Mark to return every cent he had stolen and paying punitive damages. He was also barred from any contact with Elena, her medical care, or her assets. The justice felt sweet, but it wasn't enough. It was a victory, but it didn't change the fact that my daughter was still lying in a bed, her life hanging by a thread. The money could be returned, but the betrayal was a wound that couldn't be healed. Justice was served, but revenge was still a dish I was determined to serve. Mark had spent a great deal of the stolen money on a new business venture. It was a flashy, high-tech startup he'd been dreaming of for years, a company that promised to revolutionize some obscure corner of the tech world. He had used Elena's money to woo investors and secure a prime office space in the city. The lawsuit had frozen his accounts, but the company itself was still operational. That, I decided, was where my revenge would begin. I spent the next several weeks watching him, a shadow from a distance. I hired a private investigator to document his every move. I learned about his key investors, the silent partners, the powerful people who had poured their money into his grand vision. I learned about his mistress, a young, ambitious woman from the marketing department who believed in his vision and in his wealth. I learned about his fragile public image, carefully cultivated through social media and a slick PR team. My plan was simple, and it was brutal. I wasn't going to just expose his crimes. I was going to dismantle him piece by piece, just as he had tried to dismantle my daughter's life. I started with a series of anonymous tips to his investors. Sarah had helped me, of course, using her expertise to make sure the information was untraceable. We sent them carefully crafted documents, not just about the lawsuit and his theft, but about the deep-seated issues within his company. We used the private investigator's findings to expose his careless spending of investor money on lavish parties and personal luxuries. We showed them the forged documents and the shell corporations. The information wasn't accusatory. It was simply factual. We let them draw their own conclusions. The first domino fell quickly. The whispers started. One by one, the investors began to pull out. He tried to hold an emergency meeting, but no one would show up. His phone calls went unanswered. His emails were left unread. The panic on his face in the grainy photos the private investigator sent me was a symphony to my soul. Next, I went after his personal life. Using a fake social media account, I sent an anonymous message to his mistress's personal email with a link to the court documents from the lawsuit. The documents not only showed that he was a thief, but also that his high-tech startup was built on stolen money. The mistress, who had believed he was a genius and a man of immense wealth, quickly realized she had been deceived. The next day, she quit, and in a fit of righteous fury, told his entire company about his deceit. A picture of her leaving his office with a box of her things in her arms was the cherry on top. He tried to spin the story, to say she was a disgruntled employee, but his reputation was in tatters. The final act of my revenge was the most satisfying. I knew his greatest pride was his public image, his carefully curated facade of success and power. I created a website simple and stark, with one purpose: to expose him. I posted the court documents, the bank statements, the emails, and the private investigator's photos. I didn't add any commentary. The evidence spoke for itself. The domain name was a play on his company's name, a final, cruel twist of the knife. I blasted the link to every local news outlet, every tech blog, every social media group I could find. Within hours, the story went viral. The comments were brutal, a wave of public outrage that he couldn't control. His reputation was destroyed. His company was bankrupt. His mistress left him. His friends abandoned him. He was a pariah, a thief, and a monster. The man who had walked out of a courtroom with a court order and still felt victorious now had nothing. I watched him from a distance, a ghost in the city he had once conquered. He tried to get a job, but no one would hire him. He tried to start another business, but no one would invest. He was a cautionary tale, a whisper of a man who had flown too close to the sun with stolen wings. He was a man utterly, completely, and permanently ruined. My revenge was complete. The bitterness in my heart had finally been replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I was no longer consumed by rage. The money, once it was returned, was put into a trust fund for Elena's care. I moved into her home, transforming it into a sanctuary, a place of peace and warmth. My days were spent at her bedside, talking to her, reading to her, playing her favorite music. The doctors told me there was no change, but I knew better. I saw the slight tremor in her fingers, the almost imperceptible flicker of her eyelids. I held her hand and told her about my day, about the garden, about the sound of the birds outside. The man who had tried to steal her future had been destroyed, but more importantly, I had protected her. I was still her mother. I was still here, and I always would be. The world had tried to break us, but we had bent, not broken. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but now it was a gentle ache, not a searing fire. I had done everything I could to make things right, and now all I could do was wait, hope, and love my daughter with every fiber of my being. I held her hand and whispered, "He's gone, my love. He can never hurt us again." The sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. In the stillness of the room, I felt a flicker of hope, a warmth that had been missing for so long. It was the promise of a new beginning, a quiet, patient love that would endure no matter what.